Hello and welcome back to Bicycle Legs and another edition of Favorite Song from Each Album. And can you please welcome to the channel a brand new guest for my channel, Mr. Mike Ladano from Grab a Stack of Rock. Mike, an absolute pleasure to have you on the channel. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for asking me, and on a topic that I'm extremely passionate about as well. So this is
Yeah.
going to be fun.
So today we're going to be picking our favorite song from each Marillion album. Now, there are a lot of Marillion albums, so what we're going to do is we're actually going to split this one up into two shows so that it doesn't end up sort of, Lord of the Rings length. And this first show, we're going to do the first eight albums, which I felt like was a really good sort of cutting off point because that's the EMI years, sort of their major label years. And we get, the first four albums with Fish, second four albums with Steve Hogarth. And we're going to pick our favorite song from each of those albums, starting with Script from a Jester's Tear, going through to Afraid of Sunlight. And then in probably January, we're going to look at the rest of the catalogue and pick our favorite songs from the independent years, as it were.
Can't
So,
wait to do that too.
yeah. When did you first get into Marillion, Mike?
Very late. I think it was, I'm going to say 2000. And I used to work in a used record store, used CD store.
Yep.
And as such, you could take chances on things that looked interesting. And I had always been curious about Marillion. I'd seen them in magazines, but I never heard any of their music. They made like zero impact here for whatever reason. But one day, one of my customers came in with three of those really, really nice 2 CD deluxe Marillion reissues. He came in with, I believe it was Fugazi, Misplaced Childhood, and Season's End. And for whatever reason it was, perhaps I'd asked I asked a friend, which of these three do I buy? And he said, Misplaced. Couldn't buy all three, didn't have that money, but I bought
Mm.
Misplaced. I took it up to my cottage that weekend, and I was alone, and I blasted that album for the first time, and it hit me. And I was like, wow, where have you been all my life? You know? And I went back. Season's End was gone, but I picked up Fugazi, and one by one I started collecting, and then I discovered a website called Marillion.com, and my life changed at that moment. And I placed a massive order for everything that I could get. And
Yeah.
that was the official moment. Summer of 2000, I want to say that was.
Yeah. No, look, I remember the first Marillion album I heard was Fugazi. It would have been late 80s. And it was an older friend of mine had recommended it to me. I had this older friend and he used to work at a community radio station. He used to do like graveyard shift on community radio station. And he used to get me to sort of go into the record library and pull records for him. And yeah, I mean, the first one I heard was Fugazi, and I've got to admit, the first time I heard that album, I probably didn't quite get it, but it's probably, I love that album, but I don't think it's like the perfect entry point into Marillion.
No, it might
And
be of the Fish years, it might be the worst entry point.
but yeah, I learned to love it and I sort of got into it, but I never got past the Fish years until much later when I picked up a CD copy of Anarachnophobia. I saw it cheap. I thought, I'll give it a punt. I've never heard it. This would have been probably mid to late 2000s. And no, it would have been mid 2000s. And I picked it up, bought it. The two things I thought was, wow, this is totally different from what I'm used to with Marillion. And B, I absolutely love it. I think it's great. Um, so that's when I sort of went all in on Marillion and decided I needed to own absolutely everything. So yeah,
Which is a hobby into itself.
yeah, absolutely. So let's get started. And we're going to start off with the wonderful debut album, Script for a Jester's Tear. Yeah, those deluxe editions are so good.
Aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's nice.
And So Mike, what did you pick as your favorite song on this one? This is an album where I really feel like of the six songs, to pick your favorite, there's no wrong answer, is there?
You're right. Uh, but it's funny because I messaged you yesterday and I said, I'm ready. I have my list. Well, my
Hmm.
list changed twice more since I messaged you. And like I keep waffling between songs. And for this album, I originally had Script for a Jester's Tear written down and I stroked it off and I wrote in, He Knows You Know. And I don't know what it is about that song. I think it's the vocal. Fish was unafraid to kind of shriek a little bit, take his voice to that kind of shrieking extreme, which I love.
Hmm.
I adore that. And there's a lot of that on He Knows You Know. It's almost the hook. I love the lyrics. I think they're genius. Um, I loved the music video. I just love that song. And just on a personal note, I have a friend who's very much into he was kind of the responsible for getting me into Marillion, really. But he does a good Fish impression. I just love it when he just says, "Don't give me your problems." So whenever I hear "He Knows You Know," I always think of my buddy who says that line, and that's a pretty good reason, I think.
Yeah, no, yeah. As I say, I think any of these six songs you could pick as your favorite song, and I would have very, very hard time disagreeing with you that that was a good choice. Um, the thing about this early Marillion too is, people sort of called them Genesis knockoffs and all this sort of thing, which I thought was very, very surface level. Because if you go into this band, they're not singing about the same sorts of topics that Genesis was singing about in the 70s. You
No,
know, there's no, Greek, uh, legends and myths and legends and that sort of thing in these lyrics. He knows, is a song about drug addiction. So, so they're singing about completely different things. Fish definitely has more, he's not afraid to be a little bit punkish with his vocal delivery. Um, which is different from what you would get, except maybe, I mean, he's probably very influenced by Peter Hamill from Vandergraaf Generator. And I think, that's where some of that sort of slightly punkish sound comes from as well. But yeah, to call these guys Genesis knockoffs is just such a trivial thing to say. And I think it ignores so much depth with this band. Having said all that, I am going to pick the song you were originally going to pick, and that is Script for a Jester's Tear, the title track. And I just think what a way to announce yourself. I know they'd released a single before this, Market Square Heroes, which has, probably the song you could actually call a Genesis knockoff, which is Granville. Um, but Script for a Jester's Tear again, you know, the lyrics are about pain and difficulty. Here I am once more in the playground of the broken hearts. You know, it's just, yet another emotional suicide overdosed on sentiment and pride. I love Fisher's lyrics. And musically, it starts off, quiet and atmospheric, and then it builds up and builds up, and, just ends up carrying you along and on this just incredible journey. So, my backup for this one was The Web. I nearly went with that because I think, just it's a quintessential early Marillion song. That music was around before Fish was in the band. They had that as an instrumental. And then Fish came along and wrote the lyrics on top of it. But yeah, Script for a Jester's Tear is my choice. And but as I say, any of those songs would have been wonderful choices. So then we get Fugazi, the follow up. As I say, not a great place to start with this band, but once you are fully into this band, there's a lot that you get out of this album. It's an album that bears repeated listening, I think. Of course, this is the debut for Ian Mosley in the band as their drummer. They um, kicked out Mick Pointer. They'd tried about three other drummers, including Andy Ward from Camel. None of them worked out. They ended up with Ian Mosley, who had been like a session drummer, and had played in Steve Hackett's band. And he ended up being such a good fit that he's still there to this day. So yeah, I'll be interested to see what you ended up picking for this album as your favorite song, Mike.
Again, I waffled between two songs. I originally wrote down Jigsaw. And then yesterday, I was listening to Assassin and I realized, you know what? These lyrics, they say they were written about Michael Pointer or possibly Diz Manette, the original bass player, but it's basically Fish saying, it's an argument, a verbal argument. You can tell by the lyrics, which I'm going to read some in a bit, but it just occurred to me that I can really identify with this song. That's not a complimentary thing about me, but I really do identify with this song. When I read lines like adjectives of annihilation bury the point beyond redemption. Okay, so I've messed up a couple of friendships in my life, and that line just hits me because bury the point beyond redemption with those adjectives of annihilation. Man, have I ever done that, you know? Have I ever done
Hmm.
that? Besides all that lyrical genius that is Assassin, um, I think it's just a really great song. I love it has a bit of a lengthy keyboard opening that goes into some interesting places, very cool synth sounds with some interesting percussion. Thank you, Ian Mosley. And Fish doing this oh kind of singing, and then into this neat little Pink Floyd kind of guitar lick that
Hmm.
oh my goodness. And it shifts yet again and it goes into that and I'm hooked like three times already by the three different parts I've just heard. And then Fish comes in with his genius lyrics and wonderful singing. We can talk about technical singing. Fish is not a technical singer, but my God, does he make an impact with his voice, you know?
Yeah.
Assassin's a great song. It's a bit on the lengthy side, but there's a shorter single version if you care to go down that way. I just think for me personally, we're talking about a lot of stuff that is going to be personal impact songs, and I've got to go with Assassin for that reason.
Yeah. There's been, as you say, there's been sort of speculation. Is it about Mick Pointer? Is it about Diz Minute? I wonder whether Fish realizes it or not, whether it's maybe autobiographical.
See, that's the way I
Mm.
read it. Yeah,
Yeah. That he is the assassin himself. So,
yeah.
um, especially when you think of a line with tongue forged from eloquence, because he is such an eloquent lyricist.
Hmm.
So,
And this song is so loaded with great lines. Just
yeah,
every single one has something so poetic embedded within it.
yeah. Um, I as Assassin was my sort of backup for this one if you'd picked my first choice. Because I think it's a wonderful, wonderful song. The song I ended up going for was Incubus. And I just again love the opening of that, much like you were saying, with the sassing and that sort of, it starts with that "Ooh, wah," and it's got this wonderful keyboard that um and then it just, I love this song because even though it's only, I mean only, it's about, sort of 7 8 minute long song, it's not a sidelong epic or anything like that. It goes through about 3 or 4 different movements, so it covers a lot of ground in a relatively short space of time, because you get the verses, which are, sort of mid-paced, and they've got this great, and again, Ian Mosley, sort of imposing himself on the band right from the start with these tom-tom fills and all this sort of thing. And then you get these really quiet bits, sort of ominous and eerie, and yeah. Um, I absolutely love that song. But again, you could have picked a lot of songs off this album. You could have picked the title track. You could have picked Emerald
Mhm.
Rise. You know, Maybe the only song I'm not a super, super big fan of is Punch and Judy. Um, but on the whole, yeah, it's not an easy first listen, but once you have become a Marillion fan, there's a lot to love on this album.
The only thing I want to add to what you said about Incubus is I believe there's a line in there where he talks about stammering. And my understanding is that Fish did have like a stuttering, stammering problem, and he had to overcome that in order to be a performer. And my Marillion friend has the same problem, and he really identifies with Incubus.
Mm. No, that's great. So then we get like the massive album, Misplaced Childhood, massive, massive hit for them. Included, top 10 singles, two of them, including one that got to number 2 on the UK chart. It's a concept album. It's basically one whole piece of music together, which made it really, really hard. I don't know about you, Mike, but I found it really hard to sort of pick a favorite song from this album just because, all the songs run together and they're kind of all important to the overall
Hmm.
piece. When they would play Misplaced Childhood in its entirety in concert, and Fish would basically announce it as one song, one 45-minute long song. So I don't know. As I say, for me, that made it really difficult to choose a track as a favorite. So what'd you end up going for?
So it would have been easy to say Kaylee, right? I mean, it was the first song that jumped out at me, but ultimately I went with a song that's kind of like you said, this is the problem with this album. It's kind of really two songs. Heart of Lothian with
Hmm.
Bittersweet at the front there. I think that's the way it was released in a music video or a single or something, but it's kind of hard to separate those two bits. But going strictly to the Heart of Lothian part, it has some qualities to it that I like to describe. It's hard to describe music, isn't it, with words?
Yes.
I like to describe the melodies as triumphant. Triumphant. It just sounds like something that you'd hear when the hero shows up in the movie and he's about to save the day. And then the chorus, the wide boys, born with hearts of Lothian. It's just a really uplifting kind of melody. And it sounds triumphant, it sounds celebratory. This is an album that's often quite dark, but that part of it is really bright, almost
Hmm.
abnormally bright for the album. And in my mind, there's a lot of alcohol kind of fueling the good feelings in Fish at that moment. But I had to look up what these lyrics meant. Like, what is a wide boy? I had no idea.
Hmm.
What is a heart of Lothian? I had to look these things up, and of course, Fish is Scottish and very proudly so. I'm part Scottish, and it was Fish and his lyrics that kind of made me look into the Scottish side of my family and that sort of thing. So, again, there's personal connections too. But those are the reasons why I picked Heart of
Yeah.
Lothian.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I mean, Fish himself is from Midlothian in Scotland. Um, Heart of Midlothian is a football team there. Um, yeah, it's a great song. It is very triumphalist, but then it has this quiet bit right at the end, and that's the end of side one, which, I love that it almost ends on a cliffhanger. Sort of side
Mm,
one kind of ends on a cliffhanger because this album is very autobiographical.
hmm.
Um, so yeah, I mean, I found it difficult. I ended up kind of doing a bit of a cheat in as much as the one I went for is one of the two pieces, one of the two sort of longish pieces on here that has a number of sections, and that is Bittersweet, you know, because to me it's like the proggiest thing on the album. And, that's what I really, really enjoy. It goes through these different sections. I don't remember what they're all called. Yeah, I mean, it has Brief Encounter, Lost Weekend, Blue Angel, Misplaced Rendezvous, and then Windswept Thumb, which they
Yeah,
took Windswept Thumb and sort of put it on the beginning of Heart of Lothian when they released Heart of Lothian as a single,
yeah,
which
yeah.
yeah, which got that beautiful sort of piano. It's just sort of like piano and vocal
It's
and
gorgeous.
beautiful bass from Pete Trewavas. By the way, just my little boast. Pete Trewavas is the one member of Marillion I've actually had the pleasure to meet. I went and saw the band Transatlantic in concert
Oh,
in the Netherlands back in 2009, I think it was 2009. And I got to hang out backstage after the show because I was part of the like Neil Morse fan club. And so I'd gotten like a backstage pass to sort of hang out after. And we were supposed to just meet Neil and have pictures taken and stuff. But we ended up got to meet the whole band except for Roy Stolt from the Flower Kings. So that was great. Yeah, Pete's a really nice guy. He's quite a little fella too. He's only sort of about, sort of 5'3", 5'4", something like that. But and he was wearing a Hong Kong Phooey t-shirt after the show, which I thought was great because I used to love that show when I was a little kid. So yeah, bittersweet. I love the sort of different sections, and takes you on a journey and that sort of thing. But as I say, it was really difficult to choose from this album simply because, in a lot of ways, it does feel like one unified piece.
yep,
So
yep.
yeah. So then we get the last of the Fish albums. We get the rather wonderful Clutching at Straws. Gave them another top 10 hit off this album. I won't mention the song in case it's Mike's pick. Um, but this would be sort of the end of the Fish era of the band. I know this one is a lot of people's favorite Marillion album and favorite sort of Fish era Marillion album, and it's hard to argue with that. I remember this album got reviewed in like our newspaper in Brisbane, Courier Mail, which was unusual because Marillion weren't a big band in Australia, like ever. Like even Kaylee and stuff didn't hit the charts or anything like that. But they reviewed this album and they absolutely panned it. Um, because just progressive rock, just especially in 1987, Australians were too cool for progressive rock, especially music journalists. They wanted the pub rock bands and that sort of thing, and something like this was just fodder for them to just go off and basically be obnoxious. And they were in that review. It was a horrible review. Um, so yeah, what did you end up picking for your favorite song on Clutching at Straws?
Oh, it's so hard because I do think it's my favorite album. I do. Um, You'd think I would have gone with Incommunicado because there's a line there where he says, "I'm a citizen of Legoland," and as everybody knows, I'm a bit of a Lego maniac myself. I have a little Lego figure of my wife with a spacesuit and a lightsaber on my desk. But I didn't go with Incommunicado at the end of the day. I went with Sugar Mice.
Yeah,
What a sad, sad sounding song, but so beautiful. And man, they had a knack for that kind of song. I think that's one of the things I loved about Marillion is that they wrote some songs with some serious deep feelings, but some of them are so beautiful. And that's Sugar Mice. Um, I love that line. So if you want my address, it's number one at the end of the bar where I'll sit with broken angels,
Clutching
something,
at
something,
Straws and Nursing Our
clutching at straws
Scars.
and nursing our scars. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, this you talk about autobiographical albums. Well, here, Fish was really telling the story.
Mm,
Um, he was the whole band needed a break. If they'd only taken a break and dealt with some of these things, personal issues, maybe they could have survived a little longer. But of course, that was not meant to be, and they were, rushing these things out as quickly as they could. Rush an album. Well, I shouldn't say rush. That's the wrong word. They didn't rush their albums, but the schedule was not forgiving.
mm.
Album tour, burnout, and this is you can hear the burnout in a way. It comes across in the lyrics. They're rather seething with that kind of burnout bitterness. The music, though, you cannot tell. You think that this is a band that has never been tighter. You listen to this music, it's the tightest of the four albums. It's the
Yeah,
most concise, at least songwriting wise. And I think Sugar Mice is just one beautiful piece of that puzzle. Before
yeah.
before I start gushing too much.
Yeah, no, no, no. It's an absolutely gorgeous song. I couldn't agree with you more. I found This was a hard one to choose from too, because again, I think I love every song on this album. And, again, I could have gone Incommunicado too. It was their sort of third top 10 single, got to number 7 on the charts in the UK. Really up-tempo song, really cheeky sort of tongue-in-cheek lyric from Fish. In the end, though, I almost did a real cheat because Marillion are known for their sort of trilogies of songs on albums. And this album opens with an incredible trilogy of Hotel Hobbies, Warm Wet Circles, and That Time of the Night.
Mm.
And I almost went for that, for the whole trilogy, but that would be cheating a bit too much. So I ended up picking one of those songs from that trilogy, and I went with That Time of the Night because just it's such an emotional song. Um, and again, it has these sort of quieter verses, they're up tempo, but they're fairly sort of subdued musically, and then the choruses are just sort of anthemic and outpouring, you know, and then and Fish is absolutely pouring his heart out in those choruses too, lyrics like, so if you ask me how do I feel inside, I can honestly tell you we've been taken on a very long ride. It's just, yeah, and it sort of really introduces this sort of idea of clutching the short straw and that sort of thing into the album, and that theme gets brought up a few more times as the album goes on. But yeah, just such a powerful, powerful song. So that's what I ended up going with was That Time of the Night. I almost went with Warm Wet Circles because again, absolutely beautiful song, but That Time of the Night just pipped it for me.
You know what? You've been talking about cheating a couple of times now. And if I was going to cheat, I could have been tempted to pick a B-side called Tux On because I love that song. It
Mm.
sounds like Marillion doing ZZ Top. Maybe you and I'll have to do a B-side show one day on Marillion.
Yeah, yeah. They've done some great B-sides, that's for sure.
Yeah. I
That's
just love
why,
everything about this album, including the B-sides.
for you Marillion fans out there, and I know that some of them are out of print and expensive now, but if you can get a hold of those deluxe editions that Mike has been showing, I've got all of them as well. They are well worth picking up because you do get all these B-sides and unreleased tracks and all this sort of thing, and great live stuff as well.
Mm.
Um, I would say they're every bit as good as the Jethro Tull deluxe editions, which I think
Oh,
are, the Jethro Tull ones were really, I think they set the absolute standard for what a deluxe edition should be. And the Marillion ones are every bit as good.
yep. Agreed. Fully.
So Fish leaves the band. Um, Huge sort of upheaval. Will the band continue? Will they be able to continue? They end up finding a little fella by the name of Steve Hogarth, who'd been in a band called the Europeans, where he was primarily the keyboard player and occasional lead vocalist. Then he and Colin Woore from the Europeans form a duo called How We Live. They put out one album, doesn't really do anything. A tape of Steve Hogarth's gets sent to Marillion, and they become very, very interested in having him as their lead singer. At the same time, he's also been offered a chance to tour with the as their keyboard player. And he once said in an interview that he was given the option of joining the most cool band in Britain or the least cool band in Britain. And he ended up going with the least cool band, Marillion. And they ended up doing an album called Season's End.
I haven't even opened my deluxe yet. It's so new.
Okay. I've got to say one thing. I'm not a big fan of that new cover for the deluxe edition. I
No,
prefer the original cover, but
I fully agree, and I understand that they weren't necessarily happy with it, and they've, fidgeted with it a few times. They've modified it on the 2 CD deluxe as well, made some minor changes, but I don't like this. Sorry.
mm, still, the content's worth having. Go
Phew.
get it if you don't already own it. So, what did you choose from this album with the new boy?
This was a hard one, but I ended up going with the title track, Season's End. It's
Yeah.
really passionate. It's really passionate, and the
Mm,
lyrics are so haunting. They're singing about global warming, but they're singing about it in 1989. Um, and they're doing it in such a way that is completely different from any other band. I'm trying to think of some of the lyrics, but it's about things that they may never see in England again, such as sledging on a
mm,
hill or, snow, something like that, and here I am, it's November the 5th in Canada, right? Sorry, November the 7th in Canada right now, and this is how I dress today. It should be freezing cold outside.
mm.
You know, this is not the November that I grew up in. That's my
Yeah.
lifetime. So, politics aside, I think it's a powerful song. I think, a lot of these songs, most of them were written musically with Fish, and this had a completely different set of lyrics. Then they had a guy named John Helmer come in and help with these lyrics, because I think they felt intimidated by their own past. How do we compete with the lyrics of our past? Well, let's get some help by this professional writer named John Helmer. So I think he has a co-write on virtually every song in this album, except for maybe for Easter. I'm not sure. Um, Regardless, I think Season's End is a home run. When they perform it live, they do that O Come Emmanuel part before the song, and it just adds to the whole sense of drama. And kudos to Steve Rothery, of course, for pouring every emotion he can out of his guitar. I don't know how he does it.
Mm.
Seasons End on a really, when you think about it, a very unlikely but excellent album, you know?
Yeah. It's a great album. It's a great way to introduce Steve Hogarth as the new singer. They went for a singer who could sing the old material, but didn't sound anything like Fish. They didn't go for a Fish clone. Apparently, they had like all these people sending them, pictures of them with makeup on and all this sort of thing, and trying to be Fish clones, and they wanted to get as far away from that as they could. And I think they made the absolutely right decision. As the rest of the catalog, I'm a huge Steve Hogarth fan. Nothing against, I love the Fish albums, but I'm also a huge, huge Steve Hogarth fan. And much like on the first album, I think what a way to announce yourself with the song Script for a Jester's Tear. On this album, I think what a way to announce yourself with the King of Sunset Town. You
Mhm.
know, again, starts off with this like 2 or 3 minutes of atmosphere of keyboards and bass and little tinkling percussion, and then you get this, it suddenly explodes with this incredible guitar lead from Steve Rothery, and then it comes back down again, and you get the first verse, and you get to hear Steve Hogarth for the very first time. And I don't know about you, but when I first heard this song, I thought to myself, I could listen to this man sing the phone book. You know, I just instantly fell in love with his voice, and I still to this day think he's just outstanding singer. Again, completely different from Fish, but I think the band wanted to move away from what they'd been doing in the Fish era anyway, and I think it was actually easier for them to do that with a new lead singer, with somebody who wanted to go in different directions. So that's what I went with. King of Sunset Town. Almost went with The Space, which is the album closer,
I
because
predicted you were going to go with the space, but I
yeah,
was wrong.
it was again, that much between them, but just and again an incredible song which they do incredibly live when they do that song.
Can I
But
add two
yeah,
things to what you said?
yeah, of
Um,
course.
that opening you're talking about, more of that Rothery triumphant guitar sound. But
Mm,
my favorite thing about that opening is I think it's absolutely peak Ian Mosley. He does this one drum roll. It's
yeah.
freaking incredible. That's my favorite part of that song is that Ian Mosley.
Mm.
I don't know what he's doing. No idea, but he's amazing.
Yeah. No, they're all firing on all cylinders on this album. Absolutely. Then we get an album that's probably pretty controversial, I think, with the fan base. Um, they see it as a bit of a sellout and that sort of thing. And that is Holidays in Eden. See, that's a beautiful, beautiful album cover, isn't it?
Mm.
Just
Hmm.
absolutely gorgeous. But a lot of people felt that this was like a commercial sellout kind of album. Maybe on a few songs they're chasing the hit single, but I think there's a lot of really good music on this album, and I think this album definitely needs to get a critical reappraisal sometime soon. I think the band have warmed to this album in recent years and have started performing more and more of the songs off it, which is really good to see the band sort of embracing this sort of redheaded stepchild of an album, as it were. So I'll be interested to see, Mike, what did you pick as your favorite song on Holidays in Eden?
Well, this was actually easy for me. And that's not a knock on the album itself. It's just that there are two songs on this album that really they jump out at me, and I think they're just outstanding songs. One of them is actually a How We Live song called Dry Land, but
Hmm.
the other one is Cover My Eyes, Pain in Heaven. Now I come from sort of like the hard rock side of things.
Yeah.
You know, there's a big Kiss thing there, and there's a Twisted Sister thing there, and I was a Bon Jovi fan in the 80s, and you know, that sound kind of went extinct in the 90s. But here's Marillion in 1992, I think, with a song like Cover My Eyes, which is just, you know, it again, I'm going to use the word triumphant because that chorus is just like it's like a cry of triumph, you know?
Hmm.
And it's also very taxing on the vocal cords. You try to sing that sometime, I'll tell you. Um, Hogarth is really, really pushing his voice on this song, and I love it. I love Rothery's little answer guitar during the chorus. That me, 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 me. I love everything about this song. There's even really good acoustic versions of this song.
Hmm.
It works amazingly well as a piano instrumental. There's one of the B-sides is a piano instrumental version of this, and it stands out. And it's all about, to me, the chorus, Hogarth's incredible delivery, and that dink it a dink it a dink it a dink kind of guitar part that Rothery has. It's got a like I'm not a technical musician, okay, but it sounds to me like there's a little bit of an echo happening there, and
Hmm.
just really nice effect. It's a pop rock song, no question. There's not a hint of progressive rock anywhere in that song, but I guess that's why I like it.
Yeah. No, I got to say, Cover My Eyes reminds me of the sort of, what they called in the 80s the big music. Bands like U2 and Simple Minds, when they were in their full-on sort of late 80s arena rock kind of guises. That's what I get from Cover My Eyes. And like I think they do it really, really well. I don't think it comes off as like half-hearted or cheesy or anything like that. I think it comes off really, really well for that style of music. I'm going to go for probably not surprisingly one of the more complex songs on the album, one of the more atmospheric and interesting songs, and that is the opener, Splintering Heart. Um, Again, it starts off with almost this sort of heartbeat throb of synthesizer, this ding 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 ding, and it builds and builds. They sing this first verse, and it's building and building and building, and then Steve Hogarth sings, but not as good as this, and it just explodes. Um, with Steve Rothery just absolutely wailing on his guitar, and I mean, can we just talk about Steve Rothery's guitar tone for a second throughout Marillion? You know, one thing I love about guitar players, what makes a favorite guitar player for me is not necessarily some guy who can shred a million sort of notes a second sort of thing. What I love is guitar players who you can listen to play for 2 bars and you go, ah, that's so and so. Like they're just
Mhm.
instantly recognizable. People like David Gilmour. or, The Edge from U2, or Robert Fripp from King Crimson. These players who have such a distinct guitar tone that you instantly know who's playing. And Steve Rothery to me is a guitar player like that. Steve Hackett from Genesis is another. But yeah, so Steve Rothery, what a great, great guitar player. Just absolutely wonderful. But yeah, Splintering Heart, just an incredible way to open the album. And, if anybody sort of looks at this album and thinks it's just an album full of pop rock and all this sort of thing, go listen to Splintering Heart. Or the other song that I was almost going to pick was The Party. That's in the same
Hmm.
way. It's very atmospheric and it builds up and all this sort of thing. So yeah, that's my choice is Splintering Heart. What just an incredible song. Still one of my favorite Marillion songs, in fact.
And if I'm not mistaken, from the liner notes, it said something about how the imagery of a splintering heart came to Hogarth when he was in Toronto and it was so freezing cold. It just kind
Mm,
of brought that imagery to mind.
yeah. So having sort of received the criticism, I suppose, for Holidays in Eden, the band took a complete 180 and ended up with this wonderful concept album, Brave.
I need the
What a,
deluxe.
yeah, it's probably really hard to come by now because it's out of
Yeah,
print.
money.
Because that was one of the very first ones they put out. It was Misplaced Childhood and Brave were the first two, weren't
Yeah,
they? And
yeah.
they were the only two that were remixed by Stephen Wilson. So yeah. And again, like Misplaced Childhood, this is a concept album. And I've got to say, Mike, like Misplaced Childhood, this was also a really hard album to pick a song from because, again, it has that flow to it. It's like it's
Hmm.
one whole piece in a lot of ways. So, yeah, I'll be interested to see what you ended up choosing from this album because just there's so much to go for.
Right. I waffled around again, and originally I was going to go with Living with the Big Lie, but that almost feels like more than one song. And I decided actually just to go with something simpler, and I went with the title track Brave. That's a
Mm.
unique song, and I am a sucker for those Uilleann pipes. Um, the first time I heard that song, I think I had it on a B-side. I think it was on a single that I'd bought. Can't remember if it was the A side or the B side. But anyway, regardless, I had it before I had the album. And I was like, what is that? Like, what are those pipes? And oh, Uilleann pipes. I wonder what that is. It's such a unique song. It's haunting. It's beautiful. Um, and isn't it just basically Steve Hogarth singing over those pipes? There's not much else going on, is there?
Certainly in the
Uh,
first half. In the second half, the band start playing this absolutely gorgeous, atmospheric sort of jam, as it were.
yeah.
And it's sublime.
Again, it's almost like two songs in a way. But yeah, I had to go with that one because also uh, when I was getting into Marillion and buying these albums for the first time, I would make mixtapes for girlfriends, and they all loved that song.
Yeah, it's a brilliant choice. Um, I did end up going for one of the sort of multi-part songs just because I think it's one of my favorite things that Marillion's ever done, and that is Goodbye to All That. You get like a little teaser of it at the end of side one, and then you get the whole thing as the beginning of side two on the double album. And it goes through these different sections, Wave and Mad and the Opium Den. And ah, it just again takes you on this journey. This album, the concept, it was based on a news report about a teenage girl who was wandering on this huge long suspension bridge that goes between England and Wales called the Severn Bridge.
Oh, is
And
that
she
what
was,
that is?
yeah, and she was picked
Okay.
up by the police. And like when the police took her in, she either couldn't or wouldn't speak to them. She wouldn't give them her name, anything. And they put out like these radio, can anybody identify this girl? No, we want to get her back to her family, etc., etc. And Steve Hogarth basically came up for the whole concept of this album based on what had brought her to this point where she was on this bridge. And so, yeah, this song sort of goes through some of the horrible things that this teenager had been going through, sort of living in squats and having, boyfriends who are druggos and, and that sort of thing, abuse and drug abuse and, you know, actual abuse and all this sort of horrible stuff, that took her to but the band are just cooking on all cylinders, especially in part of this song like Mad.
Mhm.
It's just they're absolutely, there's just all of them are playing these incredible parts. But I did, however, almost go with Made Again
Yeah.
because that song is such a beautiful ending. Um, depending the vinyl album has a double groove on side 4. And you can get two endings. One of the grooves, she's on the bridge. Is she going to jump or not? And on one of the grooves, you get the song um, The Great Escape, which is a song about contemplating suicide, you know, heading for
Yeah.
the great escape, heading for the rave, heading for the permanent holiday. Um, but, and then one of the grooves ends with just these little like oceanic noises, these water noises. So,
Mhm.
the idea there is that she jumped.
Mhm.
But then the other groove, and this is what you get on the CD, you only get the one ending on the CD. You kind of get the quote unquote happy ending
Mhm.
where she doesn't jump, and you get the beautiful song Made Again, where she's sort of gotten through um these horrible experiences and is ready to sort of move on. Feels like she's been remade as a new creation, as a new person. You know, I have been here many times before in a life I used to live, but I've never seen these eyes so fresh, you know.
Like a bright blue morning.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just that song. It's one of the very few songs that can actually make me weep.
Well, I don't know. You can't see, but I have my hair standing up on my arms here just
Yeah,
with you describing the song. So there you
yeah.
go. Like, yeah, he's right.
So,
It's a powerful song because
yeah.
it's really the only moment on the album that has any kind of serious brightness to it.
Mm. But yeah. Um, so Goodbye to All That's my main choice, but Made Again, oh, I could
Yeah.
flip that in the next 15 minutes if you ask me
Yeah.
again. So they took 3 years to make that album, and the record company were not happy about that. They wanted a new album quickly, which is not Marillion's strong point. But they did end up putting an album out the very next year. And it's this album here, Afraid of Sunlight. That's actually the back cover on the original vinyl,
Yeah.
the Dayglow Jesus, which is referred to in a couple of the songs. But
Yes.
that's the original front cover. Apparently, they wanted that as the front cover originally, but the record company were like, yeah, nah, we're going to alienate too many people with that. So they insisted on that as the front cover instead. But I think this is an incredibly strong album considering the circumstances in which it was made, where they were really rushed to put an album
Mhm.
out quickly, which, as I said, is just not the way this band works. If anybody knows this band, they are not the sort of band who can knock an album out in a month,
No.
you know. So again, just like the first album, I really feel like, and I mean, some people might disagree with me about one particular track, but I feel like there's no incorrect answer. I don't think there's a wrong answer on this album as picking a favorite song. So, what did you end up going for?
Yeah, you know what? You're right. There isn't a wrong answer, although there's some that I like better than others. I ended up going with a cop out easy, the obvious. I went with the title track, Afraid of Sunlight.
Mm,
I a lot of these things were not easy to find when I started collecting Marillion, when I went on that Marillion binge and started buying everything. A lot of these were not easy to find, and the official site didn't have the deluxe of this for sale at that time, and I didn't have this album. But I had live albums, a lot of live albums. They'd
mm,
been, they had a lot of live albums already at that point, and I'd heard Afraid of Sunlight on one of the live albums. It might have been Piston Broke. And I was like, wow, like that chorus, that's incredible.
mm.
It has these qualities that we've been talking about where it has a quiet and then a build up and then an explosion. And that's what Afraid of Sunlight is. It has
Yeah.
sort of a quiet beginning, then and it builds a little bit more, and then how does it now come to be on the chorus? And it's really powerful. And it has a really powerful section coming out of that chorus into the solos and all that other stuff. It's just one of the most accessible Marillion songs, I would say. A good one for presenting to people that may not be familiar with Marillion. If they like good music, that song might just hook them. But again, I went for an obvious choice. I could have gone for any number of songs which
Mm,
you will have picked yourself, and I'm curious to hear which one you picked, considering
yeah.
that, yeah, another thing is that this is a very diverse album for Marillion.
Mm,
Brave, not, Brave was not monotone, but it had a singular direction. This is all over the place. This is
yeah.
all over the place, and I'm curious if you kind of went out in left field or not.
Yeah, well, I mean, when I was suggesting that there was one song on this album that people might not think is a good choice for your favorite, the song I'm thinking of obviously is Cannibal Surf Babe,
Right.
because they're doing this sort of Beach Boys kind of thing and psychedelic, these really cheesy organ and
I love that.
but I love it.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
so good.
I I think it's great, but it's not the song I picked. I mean, you could have got when you said you went for the obvious choice, I thought you were going to say Beautiful because that was the
Mm,
single off the album and it's an absolutely gorgeous
yeah.
song.
Yeah.
You went with Afraid of Sunlight. I'm going to go with Afraid of Sunrise,
Aha.
which again, it shares some of the same lyrics as Afraid of Sunlight. It was obviously, I think it was like some of the lyrics were John Helmer lyrics, which Steve Hogarth then expanded on. And they often do this with like when they're writing, they will try different pieces of music with certain lyrics. And
Hmm.
obviously, in this case, they really liked both of them. So they said, stuff it, we're going to put both of them on the album. And I'm glad they did because I love Afraid of Sunrise. It's in 7/8 time or 7/4. It's in sevens. And I'm a sucker for odd time signatures. People who watch my channel regularly will know that, especially if you've been watching my Bicycle Legs Discovers Rush series. And yeah, and it's gentle, it's gorgeous. Just recently, just like within the last week, as we're recording this, Marillion just put up a live version of Afraid of Sunrise, which is from a new Blu-ray that they're putting out. And it's absolutely gorgeous. Steve Rothery just plays 12-string acoustic throughout the whole thing. Um, Pete Travis is playing fretless bass, which he doesn't do a lot with Marillion. Um, you know, Steve Hogarth's vocal is beautiful. It's delicate. He's not belting out like he does a lot of other songs. This is delicate Steve Hogarth, fragile almost. You get these beautiful synths and piano from Mark Kelly, and then you've got Ian Mosley on the brushes, playing this beautiful percussion on the drum kit with his brushes. Everything about this song I love. It's a beautiful respite in the album too, because there are a lot of up-tempo things on this album. There's a lot of bravado on this album. You know, Afraid of Sunlight, big, those choruses are huge and bold. Cannibal Surf Babe, we've talked about. Beautiful is anthemic. Out of This World is, again, really anthemic. It's a slower song, but it's very anthemic. Beyond You and King. I almost went with Gazpacho because I think that's, again, a brilliant, brilliant album opener. But in the end, yeah, it had to be Afraid of Sunrise for me. So that's my choice for that album.
That's cool. We picked the same song, but we didn't.
Yeah, exactly. So there you have it, everyone. Those are our picks for the first 8 Marillion albums, the EMI years. Please do let us know in the comments what your favorite songs from each of these albums are, because we'd love to know. Mike, thank you so much for doing the show. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm really, really looking forward to part two, which we'll probably get to in January. So that should be great, where we get into sort of the independent years, as it were, of
I've already
Marillion's
started making
catalog.
my picks. I've started today. I'm ready.
If you're not already subscribed to Grab a Stack of Rock, please go and rectify that right now. I will leave a link in the description.
Yeah.
Please do like, share, and subscribe here. It really does help the channel out. If you're new to the channel, please go and have a look at some of my other videos. I have everything playlisted, so if you want to see some of my other favorite albums from each song shows, I have a playlist for those. If you want to see some of my studio albums rank shows, I have a playlist for those. And if you want to see my appearances on other people's channels, I also have a playlist for those. If you want to follow me on social media, I'm at bicyclelegs on Instagram, Twitter, and a bunch of other places. I also have a dedicated bicyclelegs Facebook page. Links are all in the doobly-doo. Please do give those all a follow and join in the conversation. I'd really love to have you there. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.